Hi, and welcome to this week's episode of Ask Kathleen Anything. So, today's question comes in from an email from Greg, and he writes, Hey, I know you lost your husband, and so I'm hoping you have some words of wisdom to share about the grieving process. I know everyone's different, I hear that all the time. Yet I'm really worried that I've been grieving for too long. My wife died over 2 years ago, and I just feel like something's wrong. I should be over this by now. I really do want to meet someone else, but I just feel that I'm so caught up in all these difficult feelings and this constant thinking of my wife that seems to be getting in the way of me moving forward. I hope you have something to offer. So, yeah, it really hits home for me, Greg. It's been 4 years since my husband died, and I've worked with a lot of people going through the process of grief, loss of a spouse, loss of a child, loss of a job. We go through a lot of losses and the associated grief. And what I've really seen recently is how I seem to circle back to the concept of identity, of how we see ourselves and how that impacts everything that's happening in our lives. The implication of any mistaken identity that we have can really cause us to struggle. So, what does identity have to do with what you're talking about? So, let's imagine that you, in your mind, have created this person named Greg whose wife died 2 years ago and should be over grief. Now, I'm not saying that you should or you shouldn't, and I don't know if there's such a thing as getting over grief, but I'm just wondering if it would be helpful for you, Greg, to ask yourself, you know, who am I? Am I a man whose wife died, who's a widower, who is 2 years past the passing of his wife, who's struggling, who's not getting it right, whose life should look different, who should be out there dating? What if that's all made of thought and imagination, that's a construct? Because it is. And I'm not saying, that's just what we do. We create a persona, we create a character, and a lot of times that character that we create, there's influence from culture or from conditioning, from what we've been taught to believe that how a grieving person should act. Personally, I found that to be really interesting, and that I noticed myself saying, well, I don't want to have conversations with people who have recently lost a spouse, because at that point, when I was thinking about it, it was 3-4 months after my husband died, and I wasn't crying a lot. I wasn't grieving in the way that I could be. Um, I could be confused, thinking that there was this cultural accepted how you should be 3 months after your spouse died. Nobody knows. And like you said, everybody's process is different. But who are you? Who are you essentially without the story And I'm not denying that your spouse died, okay, because that happened. Your spouse died. My spouse died. It happened. It's filled with sadness. There are feelings that we have that goes along with that. But then there's an identity that we create around that, and everybody creates their own identity. And that's where I think your question comes from. Well, it's been 2 years, and I think I should be over it by now. That's because in your mind and in the mind of most people in our culture, there's probably a reasonable amount of time that someone should still be grieving. So I don't know if at 2 years, at 4 years, at 10 years, you'll have feelings of sadness and grief frequently. Maybe you will, maybe you won't. But there is a piece of struggle that I think you can let go of a little bit, or that can loosen its grip on you, that just might make things easier. And that is to just ask that question, who am I? Without the concept of a man whose wife died 2 years ago. Well, I mean, that's the fact, actually. You are a man and your wife. But all the meaning that's been created around that. I should be. It's like this. How come it's not like that? What's wrong? It should be different. Because, I mean, who you are is who you are. But without the story, and that's where I've really been diving into this whole concept of identity, at our essence, at the truth of who we are, who we've always been, what's never, ever, ever changed since we were 6 months old, 6 years old, 60 years old, is just aliveness, awareness, a consciousness, an effortless, innate ability to know that we are. That's it. That's the pure consciousness, aliveness that never changes, that we always are. And then there's the story of us, the story of the widow, the story of the widower. And yeah, I'm not saying that we're not that also. But if you can start getting a sense of who you actually are, is the awareness of the feelings of grief arising, the awareness of what happened. Because where is that man actually that 2 years ago, went through this experience? Like, that's constantly changing. Because 2 years ago, there would have been a story of how he was and what he was saying and what he was doing and how he was feeling. And then 2 weeks ago, that story looks entirely different. So that changes. That can't be who we are at core. That can't be the truth. The actuality of who we are is that we're just aware of it all. All of that is arising in our awareness, in our consciousness. We're alive. We're being lived. Life is coming through us. And then the other thing that I would say that I don't know that I got a sense of in your letter, Greg, but when feelings of grief arise, there can be a tendency, especially after a certain amount of time has gone by. Well, I should be over this by now. So when a feeling of sadness or grief or, a memory comes up, I used to see my husband's eyeglasses laying around in the first couple of weeks after he died. For whatever reason, I didn't want to put them away. And it seemed like every time I passed that bookshelf where the glasses sat. I was just overcome with this deep sadness. That seemed okay at 2 weeks. But in our culture, if that sort of thing happened at 2 years, something might be wrong. So my suggestion is, I just wonder, because I know this is from clients that I've worked with, where they'll push down that feeling of grief and sadness because they think, I need to be done with this by now. It's here. It came up. A feeling is there to be felt because it's there. That's real. That's what's really happening right now. So a little quick on feeling. What is a feeling? There's actually energy. There's a sensation in the body, and then there's a story we attach to it, and that creates what we call a feeling. So, I walk by, I see my husband's glasses, and all of a sudden I feel this contraction around my heart. And then I go, oh gosh, here it comes. I'm going to cry. He's gone. His body's not here. What am I going to do? How am I going to move forward without him in my life? How bad is this going to be? How long is it going to last? There's the story happening. But what's really happening is this tightness in my body. So instead of going back up into the mind and saying, well, it's been 2 years, shouldn't be having this feeling called grief, feel it. It's there. And if that's the case for you, Greg, if those feelings of grief are coming up, have them. Allow them. And the way to do that is just to try to give less attention to what the storyline is, to what you're thinking. But you're thinking, because you're having this feeling and your mind is labeling it grief or sadness or too much or whatever it's calling it. See if you can set that aside for just a minute. Just kind of let go of that, conceptualizing that, defining that labeling of what's happening, because what's actually happening is, however it is for you, a shortness of breath, a heaviness in your chest, a nauseated sense in your stomach. For me, like a clenching or a closing down around my heart. Oh, okay. That's what's there. Just notice that. Maybe even try to define some of the qualities of it if possible. Does it have a color? And it'll move. It'll change. Energy's always in motion. It always changes. And that's not a guarantee. This is not a strategy like, I'm going to feel those feelings of grief so they go away. They pass through, they move through. I don't know. But I do know that the resistance of the feeling, as the saying goes, what we resist persists. So I hope those two things are helpful to you, Greg. My heart goes out to you. It's been 4 years for me. There's moments of sadness. I don't know. I don't know what it's going to be like a minute from now. I just can relate, and I hope the exploration into who are you, like who is the truth of who you are. You're alive. You're experiencing. You have the full. Nothing needs to be fixed. Everything is here to experience your own life and to be fully conscious and aware of what's arising. And when something arises, like a feeling of grief, first of all, from me to you and from you to you, give yourself some compassion. It's been 2 years and you're feeling it. Yeah. You are. That's fine. Check in and see if you're resisting it in some way, which my suspicion is the reason that, since you wrote this email, wondering like, it's been going on for 2 years, what's wrong? There probably is some resistance to, that feeling of sadness and grief and loss is coming up, and it shouldn't be here, but it is. So thank you so much, Greg, for writing in, and I hope that is helpful to you. And for anyone else who has questions for me that you'd like me to answer on Ask Kathleen Anything, send an email to office@drkathleenperry.com, or you can go to the website, drkathleenperry.com, and fill out the contact form and just mention in there that you've got a question that you'd like me to answer on Ask Kathleen Anything. See you next time.